present since February 12th, which is the Youth Day in Venezuela. On that day, students in Venezuela organize themselves to go on street protests, and there are three main points of protest were the rampant crime rates that are happening in Venezuela. The capital city of Venezuela, Caracas, is now recognized as the kidnap capital of the world. There are many violent deaths in the thousands that go unsolved year after year. There is no impartial justice system, and all of this just goes to add to the rapid crime rates that have been rising year after year in these 15 years of this government. So that's their first point of protest. Their second point of protest is the economic situation that has been consistently going downhill, and key economic problems have not been addressed by the government. And with that goes corruption as well, because the corruption is part of the problem of the mishandling of the economy of the country. And the third point of their protest adding to the economic problems, in this year of Nicolás Maduro's presidency, there has been an inflation of 50%. That's the official figure. And the third point is the lack of freedom of expression. Progressively, freedom of expression has been limited in Venezuela, and the government has been controlling and has been putting into effect laws in the media that directly impact the freedom of expression that can be exercised in the country.
Do you have foreign journalists coming in to report on internal affairs, or is there prevention against that?
We have had foreign journalists come throughout these 15 years. Many of them have been violently attacked, because the problem is whenever there are street protests, there are groups of people that attack the protesters, and amongst those are pro-government militia that are armed, and the military, which is there to protect the people that are out in the streets protesting in a democratic country, but they actually violently suppress the protest. So many of the foreign journalists that come in have been attacked in these 15 years, have been hit or beaten, or have their cameras and equipment stolen from them while they have been at work covering these demonstrations.
Tell us about the protest today. You've got quite a big crowd.
Yes.
How did it come to be?
Okay, so this protest is a worldwide protest happening on Saturday in different cities throughout the world. It has been called for by the organization World Without a Gag. They have been very active in support of the Venezuelan people, and they have been very active in support of the Venezuelan people since many years back. And what they have several main points that they want to inform to the world through these protests happening by voluntary Venezuelan citizens wherever they're living. And their first point is to ask the international press to communicate what is happening in Venezuela. Unfortunately, there is a similar process going on in the Ukraine, and because there have been many more deaths in the Ukraine, they're the ones taking first page in international matters in the press. So A World Without a Gag is also supporting the Venezuelan cause by saying, yes, we know this is happening in the Ukraine, but this is also happening in Venezuela in a scale that is very close to what is happening in the Ukraine. So their first point is to communicate to the international press, this is happening, please investigate and please give it coverage, because the world needs to know, because international organizations need to take a stand, because there are deaths, there are violations of human rights, there is torture. There have been cases of torture by rape, of electrical torture, of torture by taking imprisoned protesters' clothes off and having them kneel on their knees for 6 hours and being thrown cold water and not being able to move while they are being beaten by military with sticks and with their military helmets. So this is all documented and it has appeared on different sites through the internet.
Is that the evidence? Civilians witnessing or experience?
Yes, civilians witnessing, civilians bringing these matters into police in Venezuela, not expecting there to be justice, but that's what they need to do. And so they have civilians that have been attacked in a brutal way or suppressed in a brutal way have been giving their testimony, and they have been going to police authorities in Venezuela to expose what has happened to them.
So the comparison that's being drawn with Ukraine, are you saying that because people in Ukraine are being sort of vilified for protesting against the government there, that it's a similar situation in Venezuela?
It is. The government vilifies anybody who is against them, and that is why the freedom of speech is being violated and has been violated for many years in Venezuela, because the government dismisses anybody who criticizes what it is doing as being fascists, as being of extreme right, because they're leftists, they're socialists, or they call themselves socialists.
Have any official complaints been made to, international bodies like the UN or any other bodies that may have some sort of advocacy role in, voicing the interests of people in Venezuela?
Yes, the opposition has put on the table to activate what they call the democratic letter, I believe, or the democratic will of rights or something like that by the Organization of American States. So the lawyers that work with the opposition are actually looking into doing whatever they can do through international organizations that are pro-human rights and pro-freedom of speech. So yes.
And tell us about the Venezuelan community in Adelaide. How big is it?
I don't have that number, really. That's something that I can look up for you and through the Venezuelan consulate in Canberra and get back to you with that number. But it is quite big. Not everybody was here, of course, today. Not everybody could make it. Many people are working. Many people have family and couldn't make it. But I can't give you an official number.
Most of the people protesting from Venezuela are other South American countries.
Sorry?
And most of the people who are in your protest today from Venezuela or other...
From Venezuela, but we have had support from other Latin American nationalities. Last year, after the presidential elections, there were massive protests as well in Venezuela that turned violent. There was a crisis. And here in Australia, I was part of a group of people who drew up a petition that was sent to Parliament, and that had a positive response from the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Bob Carr, where through this petition that was backed up by 640 something signatures that from all over Australia, we informed the Australian government what was happening in Venezuela, and we asked them to please, whenever it was time for them to do so, to look at the facts and to take a stand with regards to the violations of human rights that had happened and that were happening in Venezuela as a result of the protests that came about after the presidential elections. And those came about because there was suspicions with strong evidence that it was a rigged process.
And what was Bob Carr's response when you gave him this petition?
So his response, and not textual because I don't remember the exact words, was that Australia, as a democratic society and as a member of international organizations that protect human rights, was going to keep a watch on what was happening in Venezuela, and if the time came about and Australia had to take an official stand, they would take a stand in defense of human rights in Venezuela.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I would just like to add that even though many of us in the thousands have migrated out of our country is always in our heart, and we pray that Venezuelans back home are strong enough and brave enough to bring forth a change.